The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Centre Standardisation webinar for Agriculture Level 3 for the City and Guilds Technical. I'm just going to give everybody a couple of minutes to attend. We're waiting for 7 people, and I think there's a couple more people to dial in. So just bear with me for a moment while we allow people time to dial into the webinar. Okay, so I think we'll start. I think we have most of our attendees. As I said, this is the Centre Standardisation webinar, which is one of a series of webinars that we are providing for centres who are delivering the City and Guilds Technicals this year, and in particular the Synoptic Practical Assessment. My name is Rachel Roberts, and I am part of the Quality Assurance team here at City and Guilds. And I'm joined by Robin Taylor Milton, who is the Principal Moderator for Agriculture Level 3 of the City and Guilds Technicals. As I said, this is one of a series of different support mechanisms that we have for the Synoptic Assessment. You may already know that on the website there is also a generic standardisation webinar, which provides really useful basic information about the format of the Synoptic Practical Assessment and the marking grid and the structure of that marking grid. So if you haven't already, I would advise you check the website for that recorded webinar because it provides really good foundation information. This is the second of 2 webinars that we've run today on Agriculture Level 3. And even if you're not running the Level 3 qualification, I think what you'll find is a lot of the information in this webinar is useful to deliver it at either of the levels. The webinar will be recorded and again will be put onto the website, but you as an attendee at the webinar will also receive a link to access the webinar via email. You may have already seen that attached to this webinar are 2 sets of material, or a set of materials, which is the standardisation exemplar material that Robin is going to talk through this afternoon. So hopefully you've all had a chance to review those learner materials and explore the marks that have been allocated to each of the different assessment objectives. There'll be an occasion at the end of the webinar for you to ask questions. And you can do that by typing the questions into the window pane on the right-hand side of the screen. So there's a question pane, and please feel free to type your questions in throughout the webinar, but we'll also give you some time at the end to ask any questions. And we'll deal with all of those questions at the end of the webinar. If there are any questions we can't answer or we don't have time to answer, then again, we'll provide this information to you by email at the end of the webinar in the next couple of days. If you have any technical problems with the webinar, please don't hesitate to contact the technical and moderation support team. And the number is 01924 206 719, and they can support you. And as I said, if you have any questions, please type them in. Okay, so without further ado, we'll start, and I'll hand you over to Robin to take you through the objectives for the session.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Rachel said, I'm Robin Taylor Milton. I'm the Principal Moderator for Agricultural Level 3 Technicals, so welcome from me too. In terms of what are we going to cover in this afternoon's session, we're going to look at justification of marks from me for a variation of last year's Synoptic Assignment. As we go through, both Rachel and I will highlight some good practice in use of the documents. The document you've been sent already is a standardisation activity in itself as an example of marked work. And we'll also remind you of some of the typical activities that you can do for internal standardisation with your own centres. And of course, at the end is the opportunity for you to ask questions and either at the end of the session or sometime in the near future, we will get all your questions answered for you. So we're going to start off by having an overview of last year's Synoptic Assignment and the learner response to that. Just 1 or 2 points I'd like to highlight before we start going through it. First of all, that it is last year's Synoptic Assignment, minus 1 task which I took out to make this process more straightforward and easier to understand. However, we're going to be using this year's documents, and as we go through, we will explain some of the changes that have been in the documents between last year and this year. So those of you who were looking after doing it last year will be able to spot the changes and understand how that works. So we're using this year's new documents there. So what we're going to do now is just to run through the different tasks that the candidate is asked to do. As I've said already, this basically was last year's Synoptic with one of the tasks taken out for simplification. So task 1A, the candidate is asked to produce a plan for a combinable crop which they can choose, and they've got to cover the husbandry and management requirements to include fertiliser, sowing specifications, and a fertiliser programme referring to the standard DEFRA document for that. They're also asked to comment on environmental and legislative guidelines that are appropriate, and to explain how using a spring crop helps in the control of blood cross. Task 1B, candidates are required to operate 2 land-based machines, which would be used in the establishment of the spring crop. So obviously those 2 work together. For one of the operations, the candidates have to produce a written risk assessment. That written risk assessment can be on a template that's been given to them by their tutor. They're not being expected to actually set up a risk assessment from scratch with a blank bit of paper. It's about being able to complete a risk assessment rather than being able to map one out from scratch. Task 2, for the Lowland sheepfuck of your choice, produce a report, so it's got to be in report format, to describe the management of the system throughout a typical year. So we're talking about basically a shepherd's calendar here. And they've also got to be able to discuss 3 factors within the various time periods that will influence the performance and profitability of the enterprise. They can choose which 3 factors there. And then task 3, in order to prepare for the arrival of the new sheep, they need to plan for a permanent boundary sheep-proof fence and gate. And so specifications are given for the size of the field, just to help them with that. And within their plan, they've got to justify their choice of materials. They've also got to cost it as well. So moving on down then. So the marking grid, we have those standard Sitting Guilds marking grid. Added to that are some specific examples for the agriculture that we'll look at as we go down. I'm just quickly going to run through these, just remind ourselves a little bit about each one of the assessment objectives. So AO at the top, first assessment objectives. The little red figure to the side is the percentages that there are for this particular qualification. It will vary between different qualifications there. So the first one is the recall of knowledge relating to the qualification. So, has the candidate got the full breadth and depth of taught knowledge? How accurate is their knowledge? And how confident and secure does their knowledge seem? Are they able to back it up? And the layout is the same for each of these. So then you've got 3 bands across the top. You've got a poor to limited, band 1, fair to good, band 2, and on the right hand side of the page, the band 3 description, which is strong to excellent. The first thing to say is these do not equate to what we would have thought of as pass, merit and distinction under the old scheme of things. The pass, merit, distinction marks are only derived right at the end of the process. And then in the blue bit you've got a basic Sitting Guilds description, a generic description, and then the more pinky looking bit is the agricultural specific bit there. Moving on to the second one. So AO2 is about understanding of concept theories and processes, so 20% for this one. Does the candidate make connections? Are they able to link things together and explain why they're linked together? How well do the theories and concepts that they've explained apply to the situation, the assignment? That'll be the task mainly, but also with some reference to what there is in the scenario at the beginning of the assignment as well. So you've got, again, same layout, blue the Sitting Guild standard, pink are the agricultural examples of things that might be the sort of things that might fit into this category in terms of understanding. They are only examples, however, there are sort of things that might. AO3 is the application of the practical and technical skills. How does that fit together? Is it fluid? Is the hand and eye coordination good? Dexterity is important. Also, how confident does the candidate use the breadth of practical skills open to them? There's some examples given at the bottom there. And then there's quite a bit more detail given in the agriculture section of this, which I'll refer to later on when we actually look at the marked work there as well. And then our AO4 is bringing it all together. How coherent is the whole thing? Is the candidate able to draw from the breadth of their knowledge and skills, so across all the different units that they've studied that make up the synoptic? Are they able to apply the theory that they've got when solving practical problems? So the idea, as you'll see as we go through this, is to get linkage. Basically what synoptic is about is how well the candidate's able to make all the links between the theory and practical and link it all together, which is what this assessment objective is all about. And then the final one is the attention to detail and perfecting. Do they routinely check on quality, finish, etc.? Are there errors in the work, spelling mistakes, poorly laid out? How accurate is it? So figures that they've used, are they accurate? And would you describe the candidate as a perfectionist? Or if not, how far are they on that scale towards being a perfectionist in terms of the way they've carried out both the practical work, the written work, and completed the whole area of the synoptic assignment. So, moving on to the actual work. First thing to say is this is an example of an actual candidate's work as marked by centre. And I've deliberately left on it the comments that the marker made. Sorry they don't all quite come out because of the way it was scanned, but there is enough of them there to give you a good example of how it would work. So the marker has gone through and put ticks to show that they've read a particular thing, and they've also put little comments or questions or whatever, which is really helpful for the moderator to show where marks have been allocated and why marks have been allocated. So the candidates talked a little bit about the spring barley, the cultivations and so forth of the spring barley, also fertiliser. There they talked also about ploughing there. Quite a bit of information there. There are some crucial bits missing, like the markers made a really helpful comment there. It would be useful to include the variety, for instance, in there. And then moving on now to the second part of this one. Again, the fertiliser has been dealt with in there, but the markers made a comment about that. There's very little stuff in there just to pick out on the legislation, which the markers picked out at the bottom. So those comments there, nothing on the legislation. Written detailed plan not, i.e. it wasn't laid out as a plan, which was what was asked for in the actual specification at the beginning. Good on cultivation and establishment, nothing on the biology of blackgrass, which was one of the things that was in the task. Just one point to make about writing comments. Please try to write them as clearly as possible, preferably in a black pen, because don't forget that you're going to scan this to upload it onto the portal for the moderator to be able to look at. And inevitably, some quality is lost in scanning. So, part of the task was for the candidate to actually prepare a risk assessment. As I mentioned earlier, they're allowed to use a template provided to them by their tutor for this. The candidates produced a fairly detailed risk assessment. The only thing with it is that the Orchidemosque, you will have noticed that the candidate has actually added up the columns on the right-hand side rather than multiplying them, which is the standard practice for a risk assessment. And when we scroll down in a minute, you'll see that in fact the risk assessment does have guidance further down to the fact that the overall risk factor equals the severity times the frequency and not an additional thing. Now in this particular case, the marker hadn't made any comment about that. So the moderator is left wondering, did the marker spot that and take account of it in their marks, or have they missed it totally and not taken account of it in their marks? So just makes the point that it'd be really helpful just to have a little comment at the bottom written on there by the marker just to say that they'd spotted that. Moving on to the livestock task then, so this is basically the shepherd's calendar. There's a fair bit of detail given here, but there are some crucial things missing. The marker has very helpfully indicated as they've gone down where extra things could be included, where abbreviations are used but not explained, where extra bits of information could have been included to enhance it. And that's a good way of showing what would be needed to get higher marks as well, as you'll see when we actually get to the marking bit later on. Also, there are one or two crucial bits missed out. Lambing, of course, is a really crucial part of things for sheep and shepherd's calendar, and in March there is a very quick reference to lambing, but no real detail because of colostrum and mothering and all the other things you would expect might be included in that. So moving on through the rest of them, again, helpful comments made on the marker as they go along, where there's been corrections. For instance, on July, it's just been highlighted there that they've spotted that there's something wrong with it. Really helpful for the moderator as we go on through. And that just takes us to the end of the year there, with that one. So, the fencing task, a fair bit of detail given in the fencing task. However, there are some things that are questionable, where they've been underlined, for instance, using wood paint, and even creosote these days aren't things that are used on a commercial farm. Also, there's no particular reference there to the fence posts and the quality of the fence posts and so forth. String posts are mentioned, but not the fence posts. There is one line just missing at the bottom, but that bottom line isn't crucial to the grade. It's just that it wouldn't all fit on in terms of the scan.
Okay, just moving on to the first of one of the forms that we asked the centres to submit on behalf of the candidate. So this is the Declaration of Authenticity, and this is slightly amended this year. So if you did offer the qualification last year, you will see that this has been updated. And you can find copies of this form in a Word format on the website, so I would advise you to refer to these. We'd expect one of these to be completed for all of the learners, but you only need to upload the forms for the sample of learner evidence that we are requesting to see on the moderation portal. The Declaration of Authenticity is where the candidate will confirm that all of the work that they've done in the assessment is their own work, and that they've acknowledged any sources that they've used. This form is signed by the candidate and dated, and it's also signed by their tutor, the marker. On this form, you'll also see an additional section that's new to the form this year, and that asks you to reference any additional support, that's support that's not being mentioned in the assessment pack itself. For example, if the tutor is needed to bring the learner back on track with one of their tasks, sort of seen as additional support, and we'd expect you to declare that so the moderator's got a sense of what happened during that assessment. As I said, we expect one of these to be completed for all of the learners, but we only need to see the sample, one of these for the sample of learners that are uploaded onto the moderation portal.
Moving on to the practical observation form then, again, this has changed for this year. And those of you who were pioneers last year were offering a qualification. Of course, last year there were the 8 assessment objectives. This year we're down to the 5 there, so just to be aware of that as well. But also the form has been changed to make it more helpful, so it's got more actual descriptors for the assessment objectives. Just a couple of general points about the form before I go through this individual form. First of all, when filling out the form, remember that it's telling a story to the moderator who's not present. So from that, they've got to be able to read from the comments that are made why particular marks have been allocated. So think about it in that context. You don't have to use this particular form. Would recommend that centres do, because it helps advise instruction and it's got lots of reminders on it. But you can use your own form if it provides the same sort of information. It can be handwritten or typed, but again, if it's handwritten, please make sure that it's clear, bearing in mind that it will be scanned, and some clarity is always lost during the actual scanning process with it. It should be based on the comments that are there in the marking grid, which we're going to look at again in a moment. Doesn't have to be typed out verbatim though. lifted and copied and pasted. The words can be adapted if they don't fit exactly, but please do base it on the comments that are actually the assessment objectives that are in the marking grid. In terms of this particular form, this is the form that was filled out by the centre for this particular practical. I've left it as it was, just so you can see as it was filled out. The information that's on the form is sufficient in terms of being able to see what the marks were, but it could be enhanced. As you'll see when we go down to the next page of it, that actually the AO5 is a good example of that, where there's actually examples in there to help the moderator, things that are actually seen, practical examples that relate to the particular agricultural task that was being undertaken. And that's really helpful. And if those could be included in all of the assessment objectives, that helps the moderator a lot in terms of relating it to that particular situation. Really important form in terms of giving the moderator the information they need. And please, for the agricultural qualification, can you fill out a separate form for each of the practical assessments? The reason for that is because they are so different. For instance, you've got a machinery one and a livestock one, and candidates may perform differently in the two different assessments. So it's helpful for the moderator to have two forms. I think you'll find it helpful to have two forms as well, based on my experience so far. So the candidate record form is a new one for this year as well, because of course it reflects the fact that there are now only 5 AOs, assessment objectives there. I'm not going to say much about the detail of what's typed in blue, because I'm going to pick that up as we go down further on. But in terms of the layout of it, for each one we've got the marks that are given to the candidate across the top, which we've actually highlighted in red or yellow, but again I'll pick those up in a minute and justify the reasons for them. We've got a percentage on the left-hand side that's actually allocated for each one. So, for instance, the top one, the assessment objective 1, is worth 15% of the marks overall, which is what that relates to. It can cause confusion there, but just remember that that's what it is there. So, please do use that form. Please use the new form, which is available on the City and Guilds website and actually is in the pack for the Synoptic Assignment as well. But for the benefit of those pioneers who may have old platforms, so please do use them. And it's worth saying, if we just go down to the marks at the bottom there for a minute, when we look at the overall context of the thing, that the total mark there was 34 marks for this one. And remember, it's 34 out of 60. So the 34 isn't a percentage. Where does that sit in terms of the overall mark that was given as a result of the assessors meeting and things? Well, it comes out as a merit overall. And you'll see that as we go down through the different descriptors I hope.
It's worth mentioning that the grade boundaries are talked about for last year in the qualification report, but please remember that the grade boundaries are subject to change this year. So although it will give you an idea of where the grade boundary is, please don't rely on that as being read for this year.
Okay, so we're just going to move back now and actually go through each of the assessment objectives one at a time. And I'm going to explain why I've given the marks I've given for each one of those and relate back to the wording above, which is the standard City and Guilds wording in the blue, just as a reminder, with the sort of agricultural themed wording in the pink colour further down. Not sure pink's a very agricultural colour, but I'm sure that's standard City and Guilds practice. So the first one is the recall of knowledge there. And for this particular one, it was given 5. And so you will notice that 5 sits in the middle of the Band 2 descriptor, so fair to good. So let's have a look at what I said about it. The written work demonstrated a fair range of knowledge. It's sound, sometimes detailed, there are minimal gaps, but there are some important bits missing, which I've alluded to already as we've gone along, things like colostrum, the details on black grass. There was some use of figures given, but some bits missing. Practical was stronger and demonstrated a good range of knowledge. So let's just have a look at how that fits into the banding criteria that are above there. And the first one, recall, shows some weaknesses in breadth and or accuracy, hesitant gaps in accuracy. I think you'll agree that it definitely is better than that one in terms of the marks that there are. Moving on to the middle one, so we've got recall is generally accurate, yes. Shows reasonable breadth, yes. But there is some inaccuracies, it's missing, some misunderstandings, where things aren't quite right, but they are infrequent and usually minor. And then looking further down, you've then got the agricultural context, if you like, which is giving you examples of the bottom of the band and the top of the band. It doesn't give an example of the middle of the band, but it follows that falls sort of midway between the two. So in this case, the candidate's shown a fair range of knowledge, probably slightly better than fair range from across the qualification. It is sound, and there is sometimes quite a bit of detail, but there's some detail missing out. So that's just a bit of an explanation as to why it actually fits in there. To gain higher marks, the candidate would need to include more figures and information there, and examples of that would be in the colostrum, for instance, the black grass, those bits and pieces. If there'd been more information there, that would have moved the marks up. So moving on to AO2 then. AO2, the understanding of concept and theories, worth 20% of the marks here. So what marks are given? Well, a 6, which again fits sort of midway, not quite midway, into that band 2 descriptor, the fair to good. Explanations are logical, showing some comprehension, generally free from misunderstandings, but there is some lack of depth. Again, some of the things apply again because not only were they missing out in terms of the knowledge bit, but they were also missing out in terms of the understanding bit. Another example of that would be that there was no 3 reasons given for the sheep task, which was specifically part of the task. However, in the practical, the explanation was good, but there was limited explanation there for the fencing task. The fact that practical explanation was good on that AO2 actually moves it for me from being sort of 5 marks at the bottom of that band to description up to 6 marks. So let's just have a look at the descriptors again. So the first one, there, looking at the blue bit, some evidence of being able to give explanation of concept and theories. Explanations appear to be recalled, simplistic or incomplete. This candidate was clearly much better than that in terms of the descriptor. So moving into the middle band then, the explanations are logical, yes. Shown comprehension, yes, but some bits missing. Generally free from misunderstanding, yes, but there were some misunderstandings there, some things that could have been clarified more, but may lack depth in connections or incompletely explored, which I think quite well actually describes that candidate. Moving to the far one, what would be strong to excellent, consistently strong evidence of clear causal links and explanations. Candidates use concept and theories confidently. There was too much missing and that didn't join together for the candidate to be able to fit into that strong to excellent category. So moving on to the third one, this is the practical one, application of practical technical skills there. The mark that was given is highlighted in red there. So we've got the 11, which puts it just into the strong to excellent category there. I'm going to go through this one and say what I thought about it. We're then going to have a look at the agricultural context, which is on the next slide down, the agricultural context of the assessment objectives. Because I think you'll find that that helps you understand why I've put it where it is. So, candidate shows excellent practical skills, confidence across a wide range of topics. The ploughing was dexterous, fluid, and demonstrated a successful operator. And they were operating at industry speed and standard. So let's just have a look at the general sitting guild descriptors for a minute before we move down to the agricultural ones. So, Porter Limited, some evidence of familiarity of practical skills, some awkwardness. Clearly our candidate doesn't fit into that category. Fair to good, the middle one, generally successful application of skills. That's a practical observation form. Says that they were better than that there. And moving into the strong to excellent, consistently high levels of skill and dexterity, showing ability to successfully make adjustments to practice, able to deal successfully with complexity. The information we have shows that they were able to make some adjustments and so forth to the practice as they went along. So let's move down one page to the agricultural example, which will help explain why it wasn't more than 11 marks that were awarded. So if we just move now, having looked at the Sitting Guilds ones, and look at the far right-hand one, so we've given 11 marks, which puts it just into the band 3 descriptor for strong to excellent. So bottom of that band is candidate shows excellent practical skills, operating industry speed and standards, shows confidence across a wide range of topics, and demonstrates excellent dexterity. The top of the band, to get the extra marks to put into the top of the band, the candidate would have to show all practical skills are used in a way which produces the most optimum outcome there. And our candidate isn't quite there in terms of that. There were one or two things like the safe stop wasn't. The form for the practical observation says that there's fluidity in operation that will improve further, which implies that they're not completely fluid in what they're doing. One point to make there is that when you're filling out for the practical, please can you actually make comment about whether the candidate is operating at industry speed and standards when you're filling out the practical observation form, because as you can see, that's really important in terms of, particularly if you're trying to put somebody into the upper band. Okay, so AO4, Assessment Objective 4, bringing it all together, then we've given 7 marks here. I've given 7 marks here for this one, which again puts it into that mid-band. So let's have a look at what the wording in the bands are. So 1 to 5, the first one, we've got some evidence of consideration, tends to attend to similar aspects. Middle one shows good application of theory to practice. And the end one, strong evidence of thorough consideration of the content and use of theories and skills to achieve fitness or purpose. So let's have a look at what I said and how that relates to that. So we've got some good application of theory to practice, e.g. the crop establishment, in the task to do with the crops and to new contexts. But there were some inconsistencies, some things missing out. Examples again, mention of colostrum, importance in the sheep task, there was some consolidation of theory and practice. The machinery practical was strong, as referenced from the form that was filled out there for the practical observation. So in order to get higher marks, what would be needed? Well, a fuller coverage, basically, of aspects relating to the written tasks. So things like legislation were missing out of it. More justification would be needed, especially for the livestock and fencing written tasks. And basically, all around, would need a higher level of thinking and analysis to get it into that quiet band. So if we move on to the final assessment objective, the AO5, we'll just go back to that in a moment to pick up the final one there. So, attention to detail and perfecting. The marks as awarded in red there, put it in the middle of that middle band, a fair to good band. Let's have a look at what I've written about it, and then we'll go back to look at how that fits into the grid. So we're aiming for satisfactory result in written work. That's what I reckon the candidate did there. Risk assessments were added up rather than multiplied. Some figures being used in the cropping task, but it wasn't laid out as a plan. Some figures were missing. The livestock written task covered most key areas, but again, some limited explanation and lack of figures. The fencing task, some detail, but again, some bits missing. Very good attention to detail in the practical cultivation task, except the safe stop, which is picked up in the practical observation form. So overall, there's variable attention to detail rather than an overall and consistent attention to detail. So let's just have a look at how that fits in terms of the descriptors that are on the grid there. So our porter limited, easily distracted, lack of checking, no, definitely not that. There. Moving into the middle one, aims for a satisfactory result, yes, but some bits missing, so may not persist beyond this. Uses feedback methods, but perhaps not fully or consistently. There definitely are some inconsistencies there, some intermittent attention to detail, and then you've got the agricultural description just further down. Again, there's some evidence of planning in terms of the work, but everything isn't there, so some bits are being missed out. Work is well presented, mainly correct in spelling and grammar. Some of it is there. So that firmly puts it into the middle of that band 2 description, from fair to good. We'd like to refer to last year's qualification report. Worth pointing out a couple of things just at the beginning. The qualification report includes the Synoptic Assignment and also the other assessments. I'm only going to refer to the parts of it for the Synoptic Assignment. It is available for centres to have a look at on the Sitting Guild's website. If you go into the usual agricultural place that you're familiar with for the level 3 and look at the sort of assessment area where the synoptics and assessments and things are, it's launched there, so you can have a look through the whole thing in your own time. Just one or two important things to highlight there. For practical tasks, centres need to ensure that candidates have had sufficient opportunity to practice their practical skills. This gives candidates the best chance of performing well, so obviously that's part of the planning of the teaching and delivery for centres. If you've got a practical task where an assistant is required, an example of this would be putting largish cattle through a handling system. The assistant needs to be a student that has already done the assessment or somebody who's not connected with the assessment. Because if you use as an assistant a student who is still to complete the assessment, we can all watch somebody else do something and look at what they did wrong and think, oh, I'll improve that when I do it. Same thing with any verbal explanations as well. So please do try and use students that have been assessed or somebody who's completely independent as an assistant who won't be sitting the assessment. Practical observation forms, I've said a few things about those already, but I just wanted to highlight that on the practical observation form, please can you write on the top of it either what the task number was or what it was. So something like cultivations or livestock would be fine, or you could write task 1 or task 3 or whatever on it. Because there were a number of cases last year of practical observation forms where, as a moderator, you had to read halfway down the form before you could work out whether it was for the livestock task or for the cultivations task. Now, because the practical observation form is a generic Sitting Guilds form, it doesn't actually have a space to do that. So please just write it or type it on the top if you're typing it. Just add it in there somewhere, write it in. And I mentioned this bit already, but just to highlight it on the practical observation form, please mention to what extent the candidate was working at industrial speed and standard, because that is one of the key features in terms of the marking. When centres are thinking about tasks to use, please think carefully about this in the planning stage, because if possible, choose tasks that are going to allow candidates to show differentiation in their skills. An example of that would be a cultivation task. Ploughing enables candidates to show lots of skill and knowledge and make loads of adjustments as they go along to demonstrate that skill and knowledge. If you were to choose something like Cambridge rolling as the cultivation task, which could be chosen as a cultivation task, it doesn't allow anything like the scope for differentiation between candidates that are towards the bottom end and candidates that are towards the upper end of the assessment objectives. So just a couple more of these to move on through. And in terms of the practice activities, where possible, provide a selection for candidates to do. An example of that would be if animal treatments are asked for, then you could have 3 animal treatments and ask the candidates to perform any 2 of the 3 you choose at random. This helps in terms of preventing candidates from knowing exactly what they're going to be asked, because of course it's impossible to assess all the candidates really quickly on practical. The work very quickly spreads around them as to what they've been asked to do. In some cases, there were script errors that were not getting picked up. So as I mentioned earlier on, that means that the moderator doesn't actually know whether the marker has spotted that and taken account of it or not in their mark. So please do make appropriate comments where errors are picked up or things are missing. And to assist in moderation, for the written material, please insert comments, which you will have seen from the example, which is deliberately why I left it like that, to enable the moderator to see where the marks have been derived from. If we can get all those things right, that will greatly help in the moderation process, and I think you'll find it will help you also as you go through and record the details.
Okay, so at this point we've almost completed the formal input. So we'd like to give you, we've got a couple of questions that are already typed in on the webinar, but we'd like to give you a couple of minutes to consider your questions and type them in. We'll pause the webinar for about 3 minutes, give you a chance to do that. I will put up the slide on standardisation in the meantime so you can read through that. But use this time, we'll pause the webinar, use the time to type in your questions, and then we'll have a period right at the end where we try and answer as many questions as we can. For those people who don't have any questions, on the screen there's a summary of how important internal standardisation is and how you can use these standardisation materials to support with that process. So, as I said, I'm going to put you on pause for 3 minutes. Please type in your questions and then we will go through them. Okay, so welcome back. We've got a few questions through from different attendees, so thank you for those. We'll try and go through, we'll try and answer as many as we can. As I said, if we can't answer your question, because we don't have the exact detail, we'll come back to you with a list of answers after the webinar, and they'll be provided to all attendees via email. Okay, the first question we have was, how many learners completed the 360 and 540 route last year? Dan, we don't have exact numbers on that, not with us anyway, but the scale was much, much smaller last year. Across the whole of the technicals, I think there was about 6,000 learners. But in this particular area, I think there were about 5 or 6 centres that completed it last year in agriculture. The numbers were quite small. With specific reference to the 540, I think, Robin, you said that there were more doing it than the 360 route last year.
Yes, from my memory, there was more doing the 540 last year. I'd just like to say thank goodness we didn't have 6,000 on that.
Absolutely.
But anyway, yeah, more doing the 540. We'll check the exact figures and get back to you. And that's as I would expect it to be.
Absolutely. And the numbers are much higher this year because it was a much smaller scale in terms of registrations last year.
But don't let that put you off offering the 360 if you want to offer it. then it's open and available to be offered.
I think what we found last year is that a number of the centres started with 1 or 2 routes across a number of different subject areas. And what we've seen is the centres have expanded that tremendously this year, and they're doing far more programmes of study across far more subject areas. Okay, second question we have, is there an assessment form to use for the written tasks? We were thinking of using a revised practical observation form. And the answer to that is no, there isn't a specific form for the written tasks. The learners are requested to complete certain evidence to submit for assessment and moderation. The markers in the centre bring their judgment of all the evidence together on the candidate record form, so the CRF. So using all of the evidence the learner prepares, using the practical observation form, the centre will summarise all of that under each assessment objective, and that's where they kind of give their summary judgment and the marks that they've derived. The next, anything to add there?
No.
The next question, is it okay for subject-specific staff to mark their area of expertise, or is it better consistency for one person to mark?
The answer to that one is, in my view, it's better for subject-specific staff to mark it, because obviously they're the ones that have got the expertise to know what is right and wrong. But just coming back to standardisation, they should all be standardised. All the people who are involved in actually marking should be standardised. There needs to be one person who's finally responsible for it, and that's the person whose name goes next to it. And that person is responsible for deriving the final marks and bringing them all together. But no, I think it's good practice to have other people involved. And it also helps to get the validity as well, because you're getting opinions from several different people, which you can bring together. So it's giving a wider aspect to the results.
Absolutely, and you find that those discussions around, the marks that different people have given to that particular learner help you reach a good consensus, and it's a good, solid, valid consensus. But as Robin says, standardisation is really, really important. So if you have anybody, your tutors, your assessors, observers working on the qual, they should be involved in the internal standardisation activities. Just checking if any more questions, but a couple more. Please continue to send the questions through. We've got some more time, so we should be able to get through a few more. One question we had is, when does the evidence for the Synoptic practical assessment have to be submitted? So as you know, certainly if you've read the Centre Guide to Marking and Moderation, there is a deadline for the Synoptic practical assessment, which is the 18th of May. So the sample of evidence that we ask you to submit and the marks for all of the learners have to be submitted onto the moderation portal by that date. You can, of course, submit it before that date. You don't have to wait until right before the deadline, but that is the deadline for submission. For the optional units or for the additional centre assessed components, like the optional units, they have to be submitted to City and Guilds by the 15th of June, the latest, but we do recommend all centres where possible would submit that some of those a little bit earlier in the year, so they have the benefit of the feedback provided to them by the moderator as early as possible, really.
One other question that crops up quite regularly is, what are the grade boundaries? And we've already talked a little bit about the pass being at 40% for last year. The distinction for last year was at 73%. Just to reinforce, of course, those may change. That's just to give an idea, because they're derived each year.
Okay, just to check, are there any more questions before we finish? Just give me a couple of seconds. We have got one, yes. So we've been told we need to do cross-vocational area standardisation for City and Guilds. Is this correct? Well, when you say cross-vocational area standardisation, Sarah, I've got another question too. It's important that anybody using anybody marking a particular assessment is standardised. So if you are marking the level 3 agriculture, then all the people involved in that need to be standardised. The cross-vocational is also useful in that you get different insights, and it's important that everybody, regardless of what subject they're delivering, understands the Synoptic practical assessment and understands how to use that marking grid. But the key thing is that everybody marking on a particular assessment needs to be standardised, so they're aligning those judgments together. We've got a few more questions in at the very last moment. How does the grade for the optional units contribute towards the overall grade? And that is that it actually doesn't contribute to the overall grade. So the optional units or any additional centre assessed components, they are a hurdle within the qualification. That means that the learner has to achieve them to achieve the qualification, but they don't contribute to the overall grade.
It is worth mentioning, though, that I think when the final certificate is printed off, the students get, it will have the grades for the optional units. So when they're going to an employer, they'll have their overall mark for the qualification, but they'll also show grades they got for the different units.
Absolutely, and that I think answers Lauren's second question, which is, if that's the case, what is the incentive to achieve a higher grade? So well done, Robin, for that one. Okay, are there any more questions before we close? Oh, thank you, you're welcome, Lawrence. Okay.
Just while we're waiting, then, just in case there are any others, I'd just like to say some of you will be completely new to the agricultural level 3 technicals this year and understandably a bit nervous about it. The centres that we had last year, it worked very smoothly, they all did very well, and it worked out well. So please be confident that we've got a good scheme, a good system behind it, and I'm sure it will go well for you this year as well.
Thank you, Robin. Let me just check before we move on. I think we've finished with this. Oh, we have one more question. Is it okay to ask about the exam? Dan, I probably will ask you to say when you can, by all means, type the question in. I don't think we'll be able to answer it necessarily. So please put the question into the webinar and we can try and answer it. But to be honest with you, we may have to defer that to answer after the session today because we are focusing on the Synoptic Assessment. But please feel free to type it in now or after the webinar at the end. Okay, while we're waiting, I am going to continue then to the last slide that we have, which is really just to remind you of where you can access some of the support that you need to deliver the Synoptic Assessments. So as Robin has mentioned, the City and Guilds website tech back pages provide a range of support, the handbooks, the forms. There will also be FAQs, there's the qualification reports, and there are these recorded webinars too that you can refer to, or other people within your subject-specific teams can refer to after today. We also have the technical and moderation support team. If you've offered this last year, you'll know of this team. They are on hand to give you frontline support to answer any questions that you have on the technicals and moderation, and their email address and their telephone details are there. So please don't hesitate to contact them if you have any further questions. We also have, you'll be provided with the link or the deck for today's presentation after the webinar in the next couple of days, and you'll see the link there to the materials that we've spoken about, including last year's qualification report. I'm just going to check, I think we've had another question in. Okay, the question on exams, I'm going to get back to you after, Dan. So thank you for the question, but I'll include that in the information that we provide after the webinar. So I don't think we can answer that one today. But Robin, is there anything else to add from you at this point?
No, just to say thank you very much to everyone for attending, and we look forward to working with you to support you over the next year.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I hope it's been time well spent for you, and best of luck with the delivery this year. Thank you very much.